The man who needed $50,000 the most was the only one willing to give it back. The words would spread quietly through the city days later, passed from one conversation to another like a modern-day legend. But on that gray Tuesday morning, nobody knew they were witnessing the moment that would change 3 lives forever. The parking garage beneath Hayes Capitol Tower echoed with the steady hum of engines and distant footsteps as employees hurried toward elevators carrying coffee cups and unfinished thoughts. Rain tapped softly against the concrete entrance, turning the city skyline beyond into a blur of silver and glass. Ethan Brooks adjusted the collar of his worn denim jacket as he stepped out of his aging Ford pickup. The truck had over 200,000 miles on it, and the passenger door only opened from the inside, but it still got him where he needed to go. That morning, he had come downtown to repair a lighting system in a small accounting office on the 15th floor. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid the bills. Most of them, anyway. As Ethan crossed the garage, something near a parking space caught his eye. A black leather bag sat alone on the ground beside a luxury SUV. No owner. No security guard. No one looking around for it. Ethan slowed, then stopped. He glanced left, then right. The garage was nearly empty. Curious, he crouched and unzipped the bag just enough to identify its owner. The moment he saw what was inside, he froze. Stacks of $100 bills filled the bag from edge to edge, bundle after bundle. More money than Ethan had ever seen in one place. His breath caught. $50,000. Maybe more. For a moment, the sounds around him seemed to fade. The overdue mortgage notice sitting on his kitchen counter flashed through his mind. Lily's orthodontist estimate. The rising grocery bills. The leaking water heater he still hadn't fixed because he couldn't afford the parts. $50,000 could erase every problem waiting for him at home. A voice suddenly broke the silence. Man, if I found that, I'd be taking a very long vacation. Ethan looked up. A delivery driver loading boxes nearby had noticed the bag. Another man laughed. Nobody would ever know. Ethan stared back at the money. Then he slowly zipped the bag closed. Yeah, he said quietly. But I'd know. The 2 men exchanged confused looks. Ethan stood and picked up the bag. Without another word, he headed toward the security office near the elevator lobby. High above him, inside a private glass conference room overlooking the city, Victoria Hayes paused in the middle of a board meeting. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she happened to glance down into the parking structure below. She had been distracted all morning by acquisition reports and endless negotiations, but something unusual caught her attention. A maintenance camera feed displayed on a side monitor showed a man carrying a black leather bag toward security. Victoria frowned. The bag looked familiar. Very familiar. Her assistant leaned toward her. Ms. Hayes. Victoria's eyes narrowed. Pause the meeting. Excuse me. Pause the meeting, she repeated. Now. Because somewhere deep inside, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years had quietly awakened. Curiosity. And as she watched the tired single father disappear into the security office carrying $50,000 he could have easily kept, Victoria Hayes found herself asking a question she never expected. Who gives back a miracle when they desperately need one themselves? The drive back to the small house on Willow Creek Street felt heavier than usual. Ethan Brooks gripped the steering wheel with knuckles white, glancing at the rearview mirror more than once, expecting the world to tip over at any sudden moment, as if a single misstep could undo what he had just done. Rain drizzled softly against the windshield, and the windshield wipers struggled to keep pace with the steady gray fall. The streetlights flickered faintly along the cracked asphalt, casting long shadows that stretched across the modest homes on either side. Inside the cab of the old Ford pickup, the hum of the engine was the only sound that broke the quiet tension. Ethan thought about Lily, his daughter, sitting in the back seat with her worn backpack pressed against her lap, her eyes wide but silent, reflecting. A mixture of curiosity and innocence that only children could carry. The house itself was unassuming, a 2-bedroom structure with peeling paint and a small garden that had seen better days. Yet within its walls, there was warmth, the kind that money could not buy, built from years of small, quiet victories and countless nights spent holding his daughter close during thunderstorms or after nightmares. He parked the truck and stepped out, the drizzle soaking through his jacket, but he barely noticed. Every step toward the front door was measured, deliberate, and yet carried a weight that only those who bore responsibility alone could understand. As he entered, the smell of aged pine mixed with the faint scent of Lily's crayons, and her ever-present drawing paper welcomed him like an old friend. He set the leather bag down carefully on the kitchen counter, still sealed and untouched by greed or temptation. Lily looked up from her coloring book, her small hands frozen on the page. "Daddy, are we having pancakes today?" she asked softly, her voice a reminder of normalcy in the midst of quiet chaos. Ethan smiled faintly, ruffling her hair. "Of course, kiddo. Just like every Tuesday." The mundane act of breakfast, of flipping pancakes and sipping coffee from chipped mugs, suddenly felt monumental. It was a ritual that reaffirmed their lives, small and fragile, yet resilient. Ethan knew that the money he had returned could have solved so many problems, from overdue bills to medical expenses, yet he had done what he knew was right, guided by a steady moral compass rather than desperation. And somewhere above the city, unseen and unnoticed, Victoria Hayes watched through the rain-streaked windows of her high-rise office, her fingers tracing the edge of a crystal tumbler filled with water. She had spent years commanding boardrooms and negotiating multi-million-dollar deals, yet nothing had prepared her for the quiet courage she had just observed. It was not grand gestures or flamboyant acts of charity that drew her attention, but the steady, unwavering character of a man who could have taken everything yet chose honesty instead. She leaned back in her leather chair, her gaze fixed on the parking garage below, replaying the image of him walking with the bag, head held high, shoulders squared, utterly unbothered by the magnitude of the choice he had made. Victoria felt a pull she had not recognized in years, a stirring of something more human than strategy or profit, a reminder that integrity existed even in the smallest of acts. Back at the house, Ethan poured syrup over the pancakes while Lily giggled as she poured milk from her small pitcher, the warmth of their shared morning echoing through the modest kitchen. There were no cameras, no applause, no recognition from the outside world, only the soft, persistent rhythm of life carried on by their quiet resilience. Outside, the rain slowed to a gentle mist, and the street seemed to breathe with them, carrying away the remnants of a world that often rewarded greed over goodness. In that ordinary moment, the extraordinary act of Ethan's choice lingered in the air, a testament to the enduring power of character, and somewhere, silently, Victoria Hayes understood that she had just witnessed something worth following. Victoria Hayes had built her career on one simple principle. If something seemed too good to be true, it usually was. That belief had protected her through hostile takeovers, failed partnerships, and more broken promises than she cared to count. By the time she became one of the youngest chief executive officers in the country, trust had become a luxury she rarely afforded anyone. That was why the image of Ethan Brooks continued to bother her. 3 times that afternoon, she replayed the security footage. 3 times she watched him discover the bag. 3 times she watched him carry it directly to security without hesitation. No nervous glances. No attempts to hide. No bargaining. No reward requested. It did not make sense. "Run a background check," Victoria finally said. Her executive assistant looked up from a tablet. "On who?" Victoria tapped the monitor. "Him." Within hours, a private report arrived. Victoria sat alone in her office as evening sunlight painted the skyline in shades of gold and amber. She opened the file expecting to find something hidden. A lawsuit. A financial scam. A carefully staged performance. Instead, she found something far more surprising. Ethan Brooks. Age 42. Widower. Self-employed electrician. 1 child. No criminal record. No civil disputes. No luxury assets. No unexplained income. Just page after page of ordinary life. Victoria continued reading. Mortgage payments often made at the last minute. Medical bills. School expenses. Tax records showing modest earnings. The deeper she looked, the less she understood. "This cannot be right," she murmured. Her assistant frowned. "What part?" Victoria leaned back slowly. "The part where a man struggling this much gives away $50,000. The city lights began flickering on outside as darkness settled over the streets below. Victoria stared at the report. Most people imagined wealth changed everything. In some ways it did. It bought comfort, freedom, opportunity, but it also revealed things. She had watched wealthy executives lie over amounts smaller than what Ethan had returned. She had seen respected professionals betray lifelong friendships for a fraction of that money. Yet somehow this quiet electrician had walked away from a solution to nearly every financial problem in his life. It made no sense. And because it made no sense, she needed answers. The following afternoon, Ethan spent the day repairing electrical panels at a community center on the north side of town. He greeted customers with the same calm politeness he offered everyone. He helped an elderly volunteer carry folding chairs. He stayed 20 minutes after finishing his work because a staff member could not figure out how to reset a circuit breaker. Nobody thanked him more than a simple smile. Ethan did not seem to mind, unaware that a black sedan sat across the street. Unaware that behind its tinted windows, Victoria Hayes watched quietly. She expected to catch a contradiction, a moment where the mask slipped, a sign that the honest single father was simply performing for the world. Instead, she watched something even stranger. Authenticity. There was no audience, no cameras, no reward. Yet Ethan behaved exactly the same way he had behaved in the parking garage. Patient, respectful, steady. Victoria found herself leaning forward. "Who are you?" she whispered. Later that evening, Ethan stopped at a grocery store. He carefully compared prices before placing items into his cart. Milk, bread, eggs, a small box of Lily's favorite cereal after checking 3 different shelves for discounts. At the checkout line, he removed 2 items when the total exceeded his budget by a few dollars. Victoria watched from a distance, her chest tightening unexpectedly. For the first time, the reality became impossible to ignore. The money had not been meaningless to him. It had mattered tremendously. He had needed it, perhaps more than anyone else in that parking garage. Yet he had still returned it. As Ethan loaded groceries into his old truck and drove away beneath the fading evening sky, Victoria remained parked in silence. The investigation she thought would expose a deception was revealing something much rarer: character. And for the first time in years, Victoria Hayes found herself following not a business opportunity, but a man whose integrity was beginning to challenge everything she believed about human nature. 2 days later, Victoria told herself she was simply gathering information. That was the explanation she repeated as her black sedan turned onto Willow Creek Street just before sunset. Yet deep down, she knew this had become something more than an investigation. The neighborhood was quiet, lined with modest homes, aging maple trees, and bicycles resting in driveways. Children chased each other across front lawns while porch lights flickered on one by one. It was the kind of place Victoria had not visited in years. Her world had become skyscrapers, private meetings, and carefully controlled schedules. This place felt different, real. She parked half a block away and watched as Ethan's old pickup rolled into the driveway. The truck rattled slightly before the engine shut off. Ethan stepped out carrying a small paper bag from the grocery store. Before he even reached the front door, it flew open. Lily burst outside wearing bright pink sneakers and nearly tripped over herself racing toward him. Ethan laughed and caught her before she could stumble. Victoria could not hear their words through the closed windows of her car, but she could see everything she needed to see. Lily excitedly held up a piece of paper. Ethan studied it with exaggerated seriousness. Then he placed a hand over his heart and pretended to be astonished. Lily giggled so hard she doubled over. A moment later, he lifted her onto his shoulders and carried her into the house. Victoria found herself smiling before she realized it. Inside the small home, warm yellow light glowed through the curtains. She remained parked across the street longer than she intended. Through a gap in the window, she caught brief glimpses of ordinary life unfolding. Ethan setting plates on the table, Lily talking nonstop. A stack of homework spread across the kitchen counter. Nothing impressive, nothing extraordinary. Yet somehow it felt more meaningful than the lavish dinner parties Victoria attended every month. At one point, Ethan disappeared from the kitchen and returned carrying a toolbox. He knelt beside a cabinet door that appeared loose and repaired it while Lily sat nearby coloring pictures. Victoria watched the scene quietly. There was no audience, no praise, no recognition, just a father taking care of the small responsibilities that filled his days. As darkness settled over the street, another unexpected moment unfolded. An elderly neighbor approached the house, carrying a walker. Ethan immediately stepped outside. Victoria watched him spend nearly 20 minutes helping the woman replace a broken porch light. When the work was finished, the neighbor tried handing him money. Ethan smiled and gently shook his head. The woman hugged him instead. After she left, he returned home as though nothing unusual had happened. Victoria leaned back in her seat. The silence inside the car suddenly felt heavier. She had spent years surrounded by people who measured value in dollars, influence, and status. Yet the man she had been investigating seemed to operate by an entirely different currency. Kindness, responsibility, respect. Through the front window, she saw Ethan and Lily sitting together on the couch. Lily rested her head against his shoulder while he read from a worn hardcover book. The room looked small, the furniture mismatched, the paint slightly faded. Yet there was something within those walls that many mansions never contained. Peace. Victoria remained there for another minute before starting her car. As she pulled away from the curb, a thought settled quietly into her heart. She had followed Ethan home expecting to discover a secret. Instead, she had discovered the reason he returned the money. Character was not something he turned on when people were watching. It was simply who he was. And for the first time in many years, Victoria Hayes found herself envying something that money could never buy. The following week, Victoria Hayes made a decision she could not fully explain, even to herself. She was no longer investigating Ethan Brooks because she suspected dishonesty. She was investigating him because every new discovery made him harder to understand. People did not usually choose integrity when life became difficult. Most people negotiated with their principles. They bent them, adjusted them, explained them away. Yet Ethan seemed different. That was why Victoria created a simple test. On a quiet Thursday afternoon, a designer wallet appeared near the entrance of the community center where Ethan was finishing a repair job. Inside were $800 in cash, several credit cards, and identification belonging to a fictional owner created by Victoria's security team. The wallet sat in plain sight. Anyone could have taken it. Ethan noticed it while carrying his toolbox toward his truck. He stopped, picked it up, opened it briefly, then sighed. Not because he was tempted, but because he already knew what the next 30 minutes of his day would look like. He walked back inside and asked the receptionist if anyone had reported a missing wallet. No one had. Ethan left his phone number and drove away. 2 hours later, after making 3 separate calls and tracking down the owner information through local records, he personally delivered the wallet to the address provided. The elderly actor hired for the test thanked him repeatedly. Ethan simply smiled and returned to work. Victoria stared at the report in disbelief. That could have paid his electric bill for a month, she said quietly. Her assistant nodded. Victoria said nothing else. 3 days later came the second test. A bookkeeping error was intentionally created during a repair contract connected to one of Victoria's subsidiary properties. The payment issued to Ethan exceeded the invoice by nearly $2,000. Most contractors would have deposited the check without a second thought. Some might not even notice. Ethan noticed within 15 minutes. His call reached the accounting department before the funds had fully processed. There seems to be a mistake, he explained politely. You paid me too much. The accountant later admitted she thought it was a prank. Victoria did not laugh when she heard the story. She only stared out her office window at the city below. Then came the third test. This one was different. More personal. More revealing. Through a mutual contact, Victoria arranged for Ethan to receive an offer from a wealthy property owner. The job itself was real, but attached to it was an unusual condition. If Ethan agreed to exaggerate repair costs and submit inflated invoices, he would earn an additional $5,000. Legally questionable. Difficult to trace. Easy money. The proposal arrived on a Monday morning. Ethan listened patiently. Then he shook his head. I appreciate the opportunity, he said. But if the numbers are not honest, I am not interested. The conversation ended there. No anger. No judgment. No negotiation. Just quiet certainty. That evening, Victoria sat alone in her penthouse, a cup of untouched tea cooling beside her. The city sparkled beyond the glass walls, millions of lights stretching toward the horizon. Yet her thoughts remained fixed on a small house across town where a father and daughter were probably finishing dinner together. 3 opportunities. 3 chances to compromise. 3 moments where nobody would have blamed him for choosing himself. And 3 times Ethan Brooks had walked away. Victoria closed her eyes. Somewhere along the way, her investigation had stopped being about proving him wrong. The truth was becoming impossible to avoid. The man she had followed, questioned, and quietly tested was exactly who he appeared to be. and that realization unsettled her more than any deception ever could. Early Monday morning, a service request appeared in Ethan Brooks's inbox. The address belonged to a historic townhouse on the west side of the city, an area known for tree-lined streets, restored brick buildings, and residents who rarely worried about the price of groceries. The request was simple. Several lighting fixtures were malfunctioning, and the owner wanted them inspected before an upcoming gathering. Ethan accepted the job without a second thought. Work was work. By noon, he was pulling his old truck alongside a row of carefully maintained homes. Autumn sunlight filtered through golden leaves, scattering patches of warm color across the sidewalk. Ethan grabbed his toolbox and walked toward the front door. When it opened, he froze for half a second. Standing there was Victoria Hayes, not the chief executive officer known from magazine covers and business channels, not the woman watching from a distant office window. To Ethan, she appeared to be an elegant homeowner dressed casually in jeans and a cream-colored sweater. Her hair was tied back, and for the first time in weeks, she was standing only a few feet away from him. "You must be Ethan," she said with a friendly smile. "Thank you for coming." Ethan nodded politely. "Happy to help." Victoria stepped aside. "The problem seems to be upstairs." The house was beautiful but understated. Large windows filled the rooms with sunlight. Books lined the shelves. Fresh flowers sat on a wooden dining table. Nothing about the space felt cold or showy. Ethan immediately focused on the work. He climbed a ladder, inspected wiring, replaced a damaged switch, and carefully explained each issue as he worked. Victoria followed nearby, pretending to be interested in the repairs while quietly studying him. "You always explain things that clearly?" she asked. Ethan smiled. "People deserve to know what they are paying for, even when they do not ask. Especially then." Victoria looked away for a moment. The answer lingered in the room longer than either expected. Hours passed more quickly than she anticipated. They spoke about ordinary things. Local restaurants, weather forecasts, Lily's school science project. Victoria found herself laughing more than she had in months. Ethan never tried to impress her, never exaggerated, never asked personal questions. He simply treated her with the same respect he offered everyone else. At one point his phone buzzed. The moment he saw the screen, his expression softened. "Excuse me," he said. "It is my daughter." Victoria watched him answer. "Hey, kiddo." His voice immediately changed, warmer and lighter. "Did the presentation go okay?" A pause. Then Ethan smiled. "I told you they would love it." He listened quietly before adding, "I am proud of you too." When the call ended, the room felt strangely silent. Victoria had attended countless executive meetings filled with confident speeches and polished performances. Yet that brief conversation had revealed more about Ethan than any background report ever could. Near the end of the afternoon, Ethan packed away his tools. Everything should be working now. Victoria glanced toward the repaired fixtures glowing softly overhead. "Thank you." Ethan handed her the invoice. The amount was modest, much lower than she expected. "This is all?" she asked. "That is what the work cost." Victoria stared at him for a moment. Most people looked at her and saw opportunity. Wealth. Influence. Advantage. Ethan looked at her and saw a customer. Nothing more. Nothing less. As he walked toward the door, Victoria felt something unexpected settle in her chest. The curiosity that had begun in a parking garage was becoming something deeper. Respect. And perhaps for the first time in years, she found herself looking forward to seeing someone again. Late one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky with streaks of orange and lavender, Ethan Brooks carried Lily inside from the small playground near their home. She had been running and laughing with a friend when she suddenly tripped, hitting her arm against the metal swing frame. Her face flushed, her breath came in shallow gasps, and a small cry escaped her lips. Ethan immediately scooped her up, holding her close while gently examining her arm. The skin was red and tender, and Lily whimpered softly. He spoke in a calm, steady voice, reassuring her with each careful movement. "It is all right, sweetie. We will take care of it," he said, guiding her into the house. Once inside, he grabbed a cool compress and held it against the swelling, speaking softly about her favorite storybooks to distract her. Lily leaned into him, trusting him completely, while he sat in the dimly lit living room, the quiet ticking of the old wall clock the only sound besides her occasional sniffle. As Ethan checked for any signs that the injury might need a doctor, He felt the familiar knot of anxiety in his chest. Medical expenses were not easily handled on his modest income. Yet he refused to let that worry show to Lily. Every decision he made centered on her comfort and safety. Across town, Victoria Hayes had returned home after a long day of meetings, but she could not stop thinking about the family she had been observing for days. Her curiosity had grown into concern. That night, she decided to send a small care package to Ethan, carefully labeled with no return address, containing supplies for first aid and a few comfort items for Lily. She wanted him to feel supported without interference, a subtle way to show gratitude and admiration for his consistent integrity and selflessness. The following morning, Ethan discovered the package on his doorstep. Lily ran ahead to inspect the contents, her eyes widening in delight at the small toys and treats. Ethan remained quiet, touched by the thoughtfulness of an anonymous sender, and set the items aside neatly, showing Lily how to use them responsibly. For the next few days, the small act of kindness lingered in the house, filling the space with a sense of warmth that was hard to describe. Victoria continued to watch from a distance, noting how Ethan balanced work, parenting, and the unexpected challenges of everyday life. She saw him make choices she would never have imagined someone with so little could have made, and each moment reinforced her growing respect. That afternoon, as Lily completed a school assignment with Ethan, helping patiently by her side, Victoria realized that she had been following more than a story of honesty. She had been witnessing the unwavering strength of character, the quiet dedication of a father whose world revolved entirely around doing what was right for his child. In that realization, she felt a deep, almost unfamiliar emotion, a pull toward connection not defined by wealth or power, but by shared human dignity and the simple acts that spoke louder than words. That evening, Victoria Hayes decided it was time to reveal herself. She parked her car quietly across the street from Ethan Brooks's house, the city lights glinting off the wet pavement, reflecting the weight of anticipation in her chest. She took a deep breath, reminding herself that this was not a business negotiation, not a test of skill, but a human connection she had observed for weeks, one that had quietly transformed her perspective. Ethan was in the kitchen, cleaning up after a simple dinner with Lily, her laughter echoing softly through the small home. The doorbell rang. Ethan glanced at the clock and then to Lily, who smiled expectantly. He opened the door to find Victoria standing there, composed, her usual executive poise softened by a tentative vulnerability. "Good evening," she said gently. Ethan blinked, startled. "Hi," he replied, uncertain how to respond. "I hope I am not intruding," she continued, her voice steady but warm. "I just wanted to meet you properly." Ethan studied her for a moment, noticing the subtle differences from the powerful woman whose image he had only known from media stories. Her presence here was human, approachable, and sincere. "You came a long way," he said quietly, stepping aside. Victoria entered, taking in the modest interior of the home. She noticed the well-worn furniture, the stacks of schoolbooks, the small toys neatly arranged along the living room wall, and she understood the life he led every day, the life he protected so diligently. Lily approached, curiosity bright in her eyes. "Hi," she said softly. Victoria smiled down at her. "Hello, Lily. I have heard so much about you." Ethan watched silently, appreciating how naturally she interacted with his daughter, without pretense or expectation. They sat together, Victoria observing the routines, the small gestures, the quiet dignity with which Ethan managed everything from bills to bedtime stories. Finally, Victoria spoke, her tone even but revealing her intent. "Ethan, I am Victoria Hayes. I am the person who has been following your story from a distance. Not out of suspicion, but out of admiration. I wanted to meet the man whose character is so rare and so compelling." Ethan felt a mixture of surprise and humility. He nodded slowly. "I did not know you were observing. I was not acting for anyone." Victoria leaned forward slightly, her gaze steady. "I know. That is why I am here. Your integrity is remarkable. You returned the money, helped others, and continued your life with grace despite the challenges." Ethan exhaled, feeling the weight of her words. "I did what I thought was right." Victoria smiled faintly, eyes glistening with emotion. "And it is more than right. It is extraordinary." They sat in silence for a moment, the sound of Lily arranging her coloring books the only background. In that stillness, the understanding passed between them. Words were not necessary. The truth of character, witnessed and acknowledged, created a bond that required no explanation. For the first time in many years, Victoria Hayes had revealed not her wealth, not her influence, but her recognition of a life lived with quiet courage and unyielding integrity. And Ethan Brooks understood, in that moment, that the world had noticed in the most meaningful way possible. The weeks that followed unfolded with a quiet grace neither Ethan Brooks nor Victoria Hayes could have predicted. There were no dramatic announcements, no newspaper headlines, no grand gestures designed to impress anyone. Instead, something far more meaningful began to grow. Victoria started visiting more often. Sometimes she stopped by after work with a box of pastries from a bakery across town. Sometimes she simply sat at the kitchen table while Lily worked on homework and Ethan prepared dinner. The small house on Willow Creek Street slowly became a place she looked forward to seeing at the end of every day. One crisp autumn evening, golden leaves drifted across the front yard as Ethan repaired a loose fence board. Lily sat nearby drawing pictures in a sketchbook Victoria had given her. The air smelled faintly of pine and wood smoke from neighboring chimneys. It was one of those ordinary moments that often pass unnoticed. Yet for Victoria, it felt extraordinary. She watched Ethan carefully measuring the board before securing it into place. The same patience, the same attention, the same quiet dignity she had seen from the very beginning. "You know," Victoria said softly, "most people spend their lives trying to become impressive." Ethan looked up and smiled. "That sounds exhausting." Lily giggled. Victoria laughed too. Then she became thoughtful. "You never tried to impress anyone." Ethan rested one hand on the fence. "Maybe because I had someone more important to take care of." He glanced toward Lily. The little girl smiled without looking up from her drawing. Victoria felt her throat tighten unexpectedly. Wealth had given her access to almost everything she ever wanted. Yet moments like this had always seemed beyond reach. Genuine connection, quiet loyalty, a family built not on perfection, but on love. As winter approached, the relationship between them deepened naturally. Ethan never treated Victoria differently after learning who she was. He never asked for favors, never requested opportunities, never tried to benefit from her success. In many ways, that was exactly what drew her closer. For once, she was valued for who she was rather than what she owned. Then one evening, shortly before Christmas, snow began falling outside the kitchen window. Soft flakes drifted through the darkness while Christmas music played quietly from an old speaker on the counter. Ethan was washing dishes. Victoria was helping Lily decorate cookies. The house glowed with warmth. At one point, Lily stepped back and admired her cookie covered in colorful frosting. Then she looked at Ethan. Then at Victoria. A thoughtful expression crossed her face. "Can I ask something?" she said. "Of course," Ethan replied. Lily hesitated for a moment. "Do you think some people come into our lives because they are supposed to?" The room became still. Snow continued falling beyond the window. Victoria looked down at the cookie in her hands. Ethan smiled gently. "I think sometimes people find each other exactly when they need to." Lily seemed satisfied with that answer. She nodded and returned to decorating. A few minutes later, she yawned dramatically. Victoria laughed. Ethan carried Lily upstairs and tucked her into bed. When he returned, the kitchen was quiet. Only the soft glow of Christmas lights illuminated the room. Victoria stood near the window watching the snow. Ethan joined her. Neither spoke for several moments. Sometimes silence carried more meaning than words ever could. Finally, Victoria turned toward him. "Finding that bag changed my life." Ethan shook his head lightly. "Returning it did not change mine." Victoria smiled. "Maybe not that day." Her eyes glistened softly. "But it led me here." Ethan looked around the small kitchen, at the Christmas lights, at the warmth filling the room, and understood exactly what she meant. Upstairs, Lily stirred briefly beneath her blankets. Half asleep, she whispered words neither adult expected to hear. "Good night, Mom." The house fell completely silent. Ethan looked toward the ceiling. Victoria covered her mouth as tears filled her eyes. Neither corrected her. Neither moved. Outside, snow continued falling across Willow Creek Street. Inside, three lives that had once traveled separate paths stood quietly together. And in that beautiful silence, more powerful than any speech, promotion, or fortune, they finally understood the miracle had never been $50,000. It had been the simple choice to do what was right when nobody was watching. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more stories of courage, kindness, and second chances, because the people the world overlooks often leave the greatest impact.